we know that digitalization does not work in a vacuum, and it's not happening in a vacuum. We know that digitalization is happening in a world that is still deeply unequal, in a world where the richest 1% hold more wealth than the 95% of humanity. It's happening in a world where African countries are grappling with public debt and so are not able to provide basic services for their citizens. And it's happening in a world where the global economic order allows for the continued exploitation and extraction of African bodies, allowing our people to live precarious lives and work precarious jobs while a few become inhumanly wealthy. So this is the context that the digital economy is coming into. And so in curating this space, we thought it's important to create a space for other narratives that question the dominant narratives, other narratives that critique the dominant narrative, and narratives that are grounded in feminist principles and that are grounded in the knowledge, realities, and experiences of the most marginalized in our society. And as we continue with this conversation, I hope that we can begin to question some of the narratives that have been fed to us, but also begin thinking about what fairness, decent work, equity means for a digital world of work. And with me today, I don't know everything, so with me today I will have a panel of very beautiful human beings that I have come to meet in my work, and I hope that you can hear them, learn from them, but sitting here does not mean that we have all the solutions or all the alternatives, but I hope that we can also have a conversation within the collective to see what the alternatives could be. So I'll ask the speakers to join me on stage. We have Masana Mulaudzi, Abigail Osiki, Angela Chukwunzira, and Kauna Ibrahim Malgui. For their pictures. Okay, so just another, don't they look nice? Yeah. And thank you for allowing to be part of this conversation. I know that there may be a lot of nerves, but I know we got this, right? Okay. Please just check if the microphones are working. Okay. So I'll just ask each of you to briefly introduce yourselves, what you do, what you like, anything really. Yeah, I'll start with Masana.
Hello everybody, or bonjour. First of all, thank you so much, Joey, and to your partners for inviting me to the space. It's a privilege and an honor to be able to bring together multiple streams of work that are deeply personal as much as they are political for me. So my name is Masana Mulaudzi. I'm a feminist economist and political activist based in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I consider that part of my real work of translating macroeconomic policy into accessible and challengeable frameworks for the feminist movement globally. Part of that includes being a senior fellow at the Atlantic Fellowship for Social and Economic Equity. And part of I would say my day job, but I'm on camera, but my other stream of work is for the Wikimedia Foundation, where I'm the senior manager for campaign organizing and working to bring equity and meaningful representation to one of the largest encyclopedias online that has ever existed. And I consider this work for NAWI in the space a merger of all of those three things. And I very much like justice and joy and soft life and nice things. And I'm happy to be here in conversation with you.
Thank you. Angela?
Thank you very much. My name is Angela Chukunzira. I'm from Nairobi. I'm an activist as well, but I'm also working with CIPESA currently. And I'm doing a fellowship with Mozilla Foundation, and it's intersection of tech and society. It's the Tech and Society Fellowship. But basically I'm looking into labor issues, working with very broadly digital workers of Nairobi, which I'm linking it to the legacies of slavery and colonialism. And I'm very grateful that we are in Senegal today, because it will help us to have a broader look into old slavery versus new slavery, which is something I'm very interested in kind of connecting the dots. And I hope we'll have more conversations in this panel about this. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Kauna Ibrahim Malvi. I'm a Nigerian, former content moderator for Facebook, now Meta. And I'm also part of the steering committee for the African Content Moderators Union, which is in Kenya. And right now we are extending our boundaries to Nigeria, which I'm the chairperson of the African Content Moderators Union, the Nigerian chapter. I'm so happy to be here to continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
My name is Abigail Osiki. I teach at the University of Western Cape. I teach all things labor law at the undergrad and postgraduate level. And in this context, I'm also a research associate at the Center for the Transformative Regulation of Work, where we just focus on trends, changes in the world of work, thinking of regulatory and policy pathways to promote decent work for all kinds of workers. And I also work as a technical advisor to the International Labour Organization, where I am currently just exploring the context of platform work in Africa, and just generally, just ensuring that the voices of Africans are heard in the global debates around the regulation of platform work. And Joey had told us to say what we like. I like coffee, and I like food, and I like to sleep.
Coffee and sleep. Okay, thank you so much. I think you can see that we are in very capable hands. I will get into the thick of the conversation. And Masana, you introduced yourself as a feminist economist. That's a lot of pressure. So I will start with you just to help us ground and understand why we are having these conversations. So share with us your overview of how digitalization has changed the world of work, and specifically how the platform model of work that has been adopted affects our work and labor market relations, but what that especially means for the African continent. No pressure, no pressure at all. But also as we continue to discuss just to center power relations and what questions we need to be thinking about when it comes to these online service platforms and labor workers. A lot of the language we hear is that they are partners. Are they really partners? Why are we so concerned about big tech? I mean, people are just trying to get their money and secure the bag. So just paint for us a picture, yeah, and no pressure.
Hello? Okay. Thanks, Joey. I think that's a big question, but a question that's front and center for a lot of people who are hearing about the emergence of artificial intelligence. Can you hear the ringing? Is it this mic? Okay, thank you. And so I'm going to start the reflections to Joey's question through the lens of artificial intelligence and the questions on innovation. Some of the things that we hear frequently across the continent is part of the reason we're always catching up with these new waves of technology is because we're failing to innovate, that there's something fundamentally wrong in how we process information and perceive the world, and create new technologies that are able to almost exponentially grow the efficiency of workers within the market. But then when you take a step back using the example of artificial intelligence and you think about, from those of us working in the feminist economic space, social reproduction or unpaid care work, we begin to unpack what really is the model or the data that's being pulled to create these so-called innovations. And so when I start to talk about the entryway to conversations around artificial intelligence, I think it must be named that a lot of these companies like Google, Meta, Microsoft pull user data, and user data here is the unpaid care work or the information that is unpaid that we provide to them in using their platforms to create these large language models. So in many senses, a lot of the innovation that is being driven from an exploitative or an extractive mechanism. And that is often ignored as it has historically been when we think about the future and the design of labor. Now we know, looking at things like Facebook or Twitter, X formerly known as Twitter, that a lot of the available data and language is intrinsically misogynistic and racist and sexist. And so there are significant amounts of workers behind the creation of these technological tools that add the human element to it, refining and searching through the data, making sure that it is palatable for audiences like ours, and I think Kauna will be sharing a bit more about that. These workers also are likely and increasingly more likely to be employed precariously. They are more likely to be employed in informal contracts with a lack of benefits, with a lack of access to resources, and this is part of an increasing trend that we see globally, which we call in economics the feminization of informality. So more and more informal and precarious labor is more likely to be occupied by those who identify as women, especially in contexts like Africa. And oftentimes our politicians will say to us, well, we need these tech companies because we need to create jobs, right? And so there's a sense in which they're inviting in these tech companies to provide us with trickle-down economics, which statistically has been proven not to work. We get the foreign direct investment, and in exchange for that investment, there will be a reduction in levels of poverty that we see globally. In actual fact, for those who appreciate European economists for, I think, their so-called objectivity, we know it's within the context that it exists. Even economists like Thomas Piketty, who've done decades of research based on decades of data, have found that the only way to reduce meaningfully levels of poverty and inequality, systemic poverty and inequality, is to have a capable state that is able to provide social protection to its populations. And social protection here means access to public health care, social welfare, unemployment funds in the case of being dismissed, all of the things that we know are meaningful to be resilient and thriving in our economies. And yet, when we then turn to how our governments would be able to fund this, we know that taxes and taxation is the primary mechanism by which we would realize social protection for African countries. And regulation, equitable regulation for workforces and labor forces globally. It strikes me, though, that in this conversation on the need for taxation, that a study by ActionAid in 2020 found that the top 3 tech giants in Africa, Meta, Google, Microsoft, had been accused or found to be owing over £2 billion in taxation. And through tax avoidance, we're not doing the bare minimum to really realize the ability of our African governments to be able to fund social protection. And so as we see our interaction between African governments and their populations and their states really built around, come work here. Our labor is cheap. We are unregulated. I think we must really recognize the very real human cost of this so-called innovation, which is funded and made possible by paid and unpaid labor. And these are, I think folks will know the pervasive problems of illicit financial flows that characterize a lot of our macroeconomics in Africa, and the ways in which tech companies are in bed, sorry, maybe that's not an appropriate analogy, are in cahoots with politicians, that there is an overlap of corporate interests and tech and government interests that basically limit our ability to effectively, collectively organize for liberation. And I think the panel is going to speak about what that has looked like in the context of fair work. So it's a worrying trend, but unfortunately it's not that innovative. The same tricks of oppression that we've recognized for centuries are really being played out in these contexts, and we need to be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Masana, for painting that picture for us and showing us how it's really the same tricks in the book. Just because we are going digital does not mean that whatever extraction and exploitation has been happening is going to stop, or that digitalization puts all of us at a level playing field, but also helping us bring out the corporate power that is behind this cloud and abstract digital discourse and conversations. And now I'd like to turn to Abigail. You have heard Masana speaking about precarity and informality and the push for feminization of labor. So now we are thinking, what does decent work, or is there anything like fairness in a digital world of work? What does it look like, or what would it look like?
I think one of the first things we need to think about when we talk about fair work for platform workers, particularly for women, is we need to consider the first thing, that platform work is heterogeneous in terms of their different categories, its different contexts, different countries, different types of workers. So when we think broadly on what decent work would mean, we'll think, okay, productive work that is secure, that is equitable, that provides freedom for workers. But then when we distill what decent work would then mean for each worker, they're different things. So we talk about content moderators. While it's important for them to have fundamental rights at work, there are specific issues around the mental health. So decent work for those kinds of workers has to include mental health. But generally, if I were to classify decent work for platform workers, apart from the fact that it needs to be productive work that facilitates equity, freedom, security, decent work needs to, first of all, needs to consider fair wages, not minimum wages, which is what we have in many African countries where the minimum wage provides for, I can't even say the basics, because if we look at a country like Nigeria, where currently the minimum wage is 17,000 naira, and you look at the fact that petrol is over 1,000 naira per liter, we would see that even the provision of minimum wage doesn't provide for basic living conditions for citizens or for people in that particular context. So for platform workers, decent work, decent wages entails a wage that gives them the ability to be able to live a good standard of living. And that's beyond calculating what the minimum wage is in a particular country. And then there are issues around having access to fair contracts. Generally, for people in an employment relationship, one of the things having a contract does is it sets out the obligations of the parties in that relationship, making it easy for workers in that space to be able to refer to it if there's any breach and to also enforce their rights. So for platform workers, this would mean having a contract that is clear, that is transparent. We hear incidences of content moderators. It's actually a very sad case where they were made to sign a contract and then it came alongside an NDA and the contract wasn't given to the worker. So it means even if you've signed something, you don't necessarily know what is there because you also signed it under conditions that we could say coerced. They were coerced to sign it. You don't get the time. A typical employee, you get your contract sent to you, you read through it, you think about it. But for content moderators, for example, they had to sign it in a specific location, and as soon as it was signed, it was taken away. Except you're superhuman, you might not necessarily remember the content of what you signed. So for platform workers, decent work would mean having a contract that is fair, that is accessible, and that is easy to understand, and that is not exploitative. So one of the things labor law sought to do, the idea behind labor law generally, is to regulate the uneven relationship between capital and power. And that ideally should be what a contract in a work arrangement should do. But in the instance of platform workers, that is not necessarily the case, particularly with the use of NDAs, which is a little tricky and very exploitative when we think about the fact that the tech companies, the countries they are from, like in many parts of the US, in many states of the US, employees are not allowed. It is prohibited for employees to sign NDAs because then you're bringing issues of competition law into a work arrangement and setting workers up for exploitation. And then apart from having like fair contracts, the primary thing decent work would entail for platform workers is the right to collective bargaining. And generally, collective bargaining is the means through which workers can negotiate and articulate their interests and their needs. Without collective bargaining, in essence, collective bargaining just means a worker having a voice. If a worker doesn't have a voice, it means it raises the likelihood of the worker being exploited, being put in a vulnerable position. Now, I know there are challenges around what should collective bargaining entail, what are the structures in place for that. But before we start thinking about structures, what it should entail, the first thing is having the right to collective bargaining. It's not just a socioeconomic right, it's a fundamental human right. So if workers don't have collective bargaining, it means that organizations like Meta will find it very easy to exploit workers. And I think this is what we saw, particularly with the issue around content moderators, because in a typical employment relationship, there are trade unions in different sectors. So what trade unions do is they look generally at the working conditions and see to what extent does it favor employees. But for workers, for platform workers, because they don't have this right, it made it much more easy for the tech companies to exploit them. So it's almost like we've regressed to the master-servant relationship that we had in the 19th century in labor arrangements. So that's, it's sad, but it's the reality. And another thing decent work entails is access to employment opportunities. As Masana said, tech companies come to African leaders and say we're creating employment. And because of the lack of innovation, it's just a very easy way to say, oh, okay, yes, come create employment. But the employment opportunities are not decent, and there's actually no mobility. So I can imagine a content moderator or a platform worker, what's the career mobility in that space? So if you work in the university, for example, you start off as a lecturer, you move to senior lecturer, you find yourself as a professor. Eventually, in some universities, you become a senior professor or emeritus. But for platform workers, there's no career mobility, there's no career progression, and this has an impact on their right to dignity, because being able to work is tied to human dignity, which is a fundamental right for human beings. And then there are issues around data processing. I just feel that for many African leaders, they've really not considered the socioeconomic value of data. And Masana, I'm not sure if she said it here, but at the pre-meeting, one of the things she had highlighted was the use of data to determine how to target people for marketing, targeting women, African women to access predatory loans. Now, for workers, their data means, for platform workers, for example, their data means is a way to, first of all, access their KPI, is a way to show that this is what these workers have been doing, and to also access their skill. But what happens is many of them don't have the right to this data, which ideally should be their right. It's the value for platform workers is immense. So it's almost like not having the appropriate, even though there are really nice data protection laws in Africa. But of course, this challenge still remains: to what extent will it apply to the context of platform workers? So for platform workers, decent work also means having the right to data processing that is legal, that is transparent, that prohibits discrimination. And when we think about women in the platform economy, we know that for women generally, that being in the labor market, there are certain conditions that are aggravated when it comes to female workers. And it's also the same we see for platform work, where ideally what platform work should have done is, one of the unique characteristics of platform work is it's easy entry. So what that means is that for a lot of women, they can participate in the platform economy and at the same time perform their domestic duties, right? But the problem with that is that because of the way the platform economy is structured through the use of algorithm, what happens is existing bias in the world, in the society, in the world of work is aggravated for platform, for female platform workers, where you see that they may not get the same kind of jobs, for example, as the men, just because they are women. They earn little. So you find that in content moderation, for example, what research has shown is that for females in that particular space, particularly, let's say, editing, they earn less than their men for doing the same work. And this contradicts a lot of international labor standards, where it's a right to have equal pay for equal work. So for women, it's also the issue of prohibition of discrimination and the different ways it manifests for women. There are also issues around social protection. Social protection has various measures. But then for women, it also needs to consider things around maternity leave, things around old age for platform workers, things around what's protection against injury at work, healthy work and healthy working space. We know that for a lot of platform workers, they find themselves either working from home, working in their cars, and all of this have peculiar implications for health and safety. So having decent work for these workers means that all of that needs to be considered. Honestly, if we were to talk about decent work for platform workers, we could probably spend the whole day here, because then we need to even think about the different categories. What will it be for a location-based worker? What will it be for a freelancer within that space of location-based workers? What will it be for domestic workers? Because domestic workers work in personal spaces. They work in homes where they're exposed to violence and harassment in the workplace. The uncertainty around who you're going to offer your service to means that you're in a precarious and exploitative condition. So there are just issues around each of those contexts, but generally, if I were to just think of decent work for platform workers, apart from it being productive, is just having fundamental rights at work, which entails collective bargaining, social security, protection against forced labor, because in a sense, forcing content moderators to sign NDAs, not giving them access to their contract, that's forced labor. We might just argue that, oh, but they are not holding them, there's no, like, maybe they are not held to gunpoint or something. But the conditions under which they did that means they actually really do not have an option. And if, because of the context of Africa, many workers are working from the point of desperation, not from the point of choice. So having basic decent work means that people can have options. We can actually call tech companies to order, even in terms of the disparity in the wages that workers in the global south earn compared to workers in the global north for the same work. It's really quite shocking. They're like, oh, in Kenya, they're earning shillings, so we could just give them this particular amount of money. But what works in many parts of the global north is because there are already structures and institutions in place where, despite the classification of many of these workers as independent contractors, they have basic rights, which doesn't exist in many African countries, which makes platform work really, really indecent. And for many of these workers, while they're working, they find themselves in what is known as working poverty.
Thank you, Abby. And I did have a question also around, with the way digitalization and technology is the fast-paced nature, I'm wondering whether labor laws are able to keep up. And I ask this because of a digital protocol that I think this year was put into law, and a lot of what was within that protocol, the digital protocol of the AFCFTA, a lot of what was within that is things that within, like, the European Union and the US, principles that had been actually found not to be just. And yet those are the same principles that we adopted as African countries. And our leaders were applauding themselves for being very innovative, very fast forward. And so I'm just thinking about what Masana said of corporate companies being in cahoots with our leaders, and whether laws and regulation will actually save us. But you can answer that after. Okay. You can first sit with it. I will turn to Angela. And Angela, you have done a lot of work and research with workers in Kenya. And from the conversations, from what Abby has shared, we make very many assumptions. This is what fair work is. This is what fair wages are. But we need this theory to be steeped in realities and experiences of workers. So what have been the experiences of workers, and particularly whether workers are using the digital space to form solidarity, communities of care, to then fight these very exploitative ways of working?
Thank you very much. But I think when we talk about workers in the digital economy, I'll just pick up something that Abigail said that I felt was quite stunning to me, because when you're thinking of African digital workers in terms of compensation, you're saying, oh, someone is living in Nairobi, they're earning in shillings, so they need to earn this much. Those things are not also culturally sensitive, because when you think of a black person from a family in Kenya who's a first daughter, oh God, first daughters, I'm sorry. But if you're a first daughter, there's so much burden upon you. So you're taking care not only of your siblings, your entire family, your in-laws. There's all those cultural considerations that are not put into consideration when they're thinking of compensation in the global south, especially given the scarcity of jobs. It's not only that the systems have crumbled, but also the need to take care of your family. The care economy from a very basic nuclear perspective. And so when you're thinking of digitization, I think firstly, we need to even think about digital labor in narratives in the society first of all. Because those are some of the things that create assumptions. And yes, I'm focusing a lot on platform work. The research I've done is a lot on gig workers. But I also see the impact of digitization generally, even on people who are not directly working on digital platforms. For example, let's think of us being in a hotel, for instance. If your room is not clean, you'll go to your room and you'll be so mad and upset, and you'll put it on TripAdvisor or Google and say Radisson Blu does not clean. And do you know Radisson Blu, which is actually now, they're contracting these workers, I'm assuming it's a third-party contract. And these workers, the one who cleaned your room that day you sent the report, will be tracked down. So this is somebody who's not working on a platform, but digitization is affecting them in a way that, some things we don't think about, actually. And so how we are framing and thinking about digital work is, yes, there's a direct affiliation to digital workers, but digitization is affecting every worker in the world. Before I just go to the assumptions, I always think of domestic workers because that is a primary source of care. It's such an important and fundamental work that we must actually think about and center. And in Kenya, there's a slang word that is used to call domestic workers. They're called botch, right? It's so derogatory. Besides it being like a marker of class, it's also how people just think of domestic work so lowly. And that could be very problematic to kind of also think of now how, when I think of the string of digitization of work, even people who are thinking about content moderators, people don't think them as skilled workers or AI labelers, So these are people who have no skill, and that is not true. And this is also very important work that they're doing, that they're participating in. And so how language and narratives shape and form how we perceive digital work must be rethought. Sociologically, how we are setting workers up, how we are thinking about workers and categorizing them and classifying them in terms of narratives is a very important thing for me. And so going to the assumptions and the framing, one of the things is like digital work is amazing work, So Nairobi, Kenya specifically, has been called Silicon Savannah. Even the framing of Silicon Savannah is very uncreative, like we just want California to come to Kenya. Are we not thinking of our own way? Like, can tech not work for us? Can we not think of new creative ways of, what do we want tech to look like for us? Like, whose knowledge is this? Oh, whose knowledge is here? Whose knowledge is this that we're thinking about? And for me, those framings are fundamental in terms of the core, and linking that kind of framing of Silicon Savannah and tech work, and now starting to think like when somebody like Kauna, for instance, goes home and says like, oh, I've been working in Kenya, nobody thinks of the conditions as deplorable. Like, you took a plane, come on, like, and you're working for Facebook, a major tech company, So that kind of framing also, I think we need to rethink it, and people who are working with tech workers, we have a responsibility to also shed light on these kind of ideas that, this is not what happens. And in terms of language and colonization, when I think, because of framing and narratives of this kind of works, of work that is given to workers, I think about how colonialism entirely destroys oral tradition, and how these things are actually passed orally. So when I think of the line of the early 20th century when colonizers were settling in Kenya, what happened, for example, was grandparents, or not necessarily grandparents, but the elderly generation would give stories to the children while the food was being cooked in the kitchen. And this was such a fundamental part of education because this was a part where values were being sent, and it was through stories, right? Storytelling. So values were being shared with the generations, and at the same time, it was also the tradition and the history of people. But when formal education got in, these children who were being told the stories were taken to boarding schools. They were even not allowed to speak their own language. That's how absurd it was. And you're only supposed to speak English. So what happens is that you lose some of the values and the stories that you learn from your grandparents. And this oral tradition is not passed on to the next generation. So that was a way of killing it. And this is also what I'm seeing in the new form of colonialism, digital colonialism, where people who, the young generation, we're just being put in a digital world where we're assuming that this is how work has always been. So my nephew, who's maybe 10, when I ask him what do you want to be, he can say, I want to be a YouTuber. But that's not something that I was aspiring to when I was growing up, because this was not like a career in itself. And so what I'm trying to say is that we're being put in a thing like this thing has always existed. You know, there's no, yeah, it's like this is a new job, and you should be happy about the novelty of it. But when you think of a YouTuber, this is actually a marketer in some ways, right? And so it's a digital marketing, but that has been made so fancy because it's on YouTube and you're having cameras everywhere, yet you're a precarious worker because that's your own camera. The marketing company or whatever product that you're marketing does it at will. Like, they'll give you the packs that they feel like are important or not. And then also, like, another assumption is that you're an independent worker, right? So the independence of your work is actually, I'm surprised, like in Kenya, how much the state is involved in pushing this agenda of digital work. So we have hubs called Ajira Digital that were established in 2016 that are actually trained, it's under the Minister of Youth and Culture, that are actually training the youth to be able to work in digital jobs. And so this is an involvement of big tech and the state being in bed together. I use that. Being in cahoots and being trained to kind of influence the mind of the youth that digital jobs are fancy. Digital jobs are the way to go. You're an independent worker. You can work from home. You can earn whatever amount you want. You know, some of the interviews that I've done with some youth, they're like, you know, I actually determine how much I earn. No, you don't, but it's the narrative and it's the framing. And also the assumption of the supply chain, right? It's very dark. You would never imagine some of the horrendous and horrific stories of tech workers, but also because it's very intentionally invisibilized. And so that's another great assumption of digital work. Like, you know, people just do it and they earn money and they earn in dollars. And so there are also these framings, narratives, like in Kenya. I will give all examples from Kenya because that's what I'm most familiar with. There's a phrase that was being used, bonyeza computer upate dollar, which basically translates to press the computer and get some dollars. It's that easy, you know? So people are not understanding the supply chain, the BPOs involved, summer source, all these other outsourcing companies that actually exploit workers, and even workers who are working independently but through mediated works. There's a lot of issues that they face. There's a lot of challenges that they face in terms of getting their payment done. I'm saying, like, PayPal sometimes does not work in our continent. It sometimes just jams. And so they have to create a level of solidarity with other workers across the globe to be able to navigate these spaces, of which it could be something that is stirring up a good thing. And then in terms of the reality of also patriarchal continuation on the digital spaces and assumptions. I exclusively talked to virtual assistants, and it's the one online job that I'm seeing it's exclusively gendered. It's all the virtual assistants I spoke to were women. I never spoke to a single male virtual assistant. And these are highly skilled workers, you know? They're keeping up with LinkedIn posts. They're doing like things that I would never imagine to do. And these are people who are being told, oh, is this not just a secretary? And so I wonder what it means for women to navigate these spaces and how there are so many assumptions around digital work, you know. Some women drivers who are Uber drivers, they have to negotiate things like safety. And so when you think of solidarity, some of the things that they're doing is doing pickups for school together. They're doing school pickups, so there's the school pickups together, and some of them are running other businesses on the side. Their WhatsApp groups are vibrant. They're always talking about giving information. Don't go to this area, it's dark that side. There are cops here. So also an exchange group, but also this is also not to romanticize the digital world, but women have always been organizing in chamas, in Stockveld in South Africa, I think that's the word, but women's groups, right? So they're always like, you know, if you're short on rent and it's towards the end of the month, they're collecting money there because these are digital workers, and so those are some of the solidarities that I've seen. But also, you know, my understanding and my sight of digital work it's not coming from nowhere. It is really a continuation of a certain legacy, and we've seen it's a legacy of colonialism and slavery. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. A lot to sit with and digest. And I will quickly move to Kauna. And Kauna, you share with us your experience of working within the platform economy. Maybe share with us what kind of work that you did, but also as you introduced yourself, you talked about the African Content Moderators Union. And so what does unionizing look like? What kinds of gains have you made? What essentially does the union do? Have you seen any benefits from that, and what unionizing as a platform worker looks like?
All right, thank you, Joey, and thank you for my co-speakers. You've really touched a lot on what we do. So first of all, content moderation means reviewing contents, toxic contents on the big tech companies' platforms, such as Facebook, TikTok, and ChatGPT and all that. So for me specifically, I worked for Facebook, now Meta, as a content moderator for my local language, which I speak, Hausa, from Nigeria. Yeah, so in 2019, I'm among one of the first pioneers of the sub-Saharan African content moderators. And yeah, when we got the link to apply for the job, I was told it's translation. So we're like, okay, you translate in Hausa language, there's this job, you can do it, because I was a master's student then, and I thought, yeah, it's gonna be a good side, job to do. During the interview, they just said, oh, they gave us some Bible verse to translate to Hausa language to really prove that we're going to do translation. And after then, fast forward, we realized that it was now Facebook content moderation. And we were not told, you're going to do Facebook moderation and this is what it entails. So we're just lured to do the job. We found out exactly what we're doing, I think on the second week or so, that this is exactly what we're doing. And during the training, it was just a 2-3 weeks training, and it was just rushed, For those of us who have engaged with the Facebook community standards, there's a whole lot of policies for you to go through, and we have no writing materials. You are not expected to record, so you just have to listen, and then it stays with you. That's what they assume. The training was quite rigorous because we were wondering, like, what is actually happening? And most of the examples they would show us then were just in black and white, so you could really not see blood, you would not see the most, gory videos and all that. So you're like, okay, maybe it's something we can manage. 2-3 months, now the real content started coming. When I mean real content, because prior to that, we would just do Facebook profile pictures, written text of bullying, harassment, hate speech, which would not really make a lot of impact because you're not the target, of course. But when we started seeing now the real gory, graphic contents on Facebook, which maybe some of us might have bumped on when you're just scrolling on your Facebook page, this is what we do on a daily basis, reviewing those contents. It can be suicide, child abuse, molestation, rape. Think about the most horrible thing you could ever imagine is what we work on every day. And while we started doing the work, the training, I would say, I think on the second week or so, we were called in 10 or 20 of us to a room, and they were like, okay, here's a form. You just need to sign this, and you'll submit it back immediately. So they were just standing. If you have any question, you can just ask, but you need to sign this. So it was now what she was talking about, the non-disclosure agreement. But for me, I vividly remembered I'll go to 20 years to jail for 20 years if I ever disclose that I worked for Facebook. And the time was, this whole thing took me, let's say 10 minutes. Just sign, just read through and sign. So we couldn't even ask, the basic questions because we didn't understand. During the training, it was just black and white. You read, Kauna is a girl, or Kauna has a big head. So we're like, okay, maybe that's just a nice job to do. There's nothing to raise alarms for me to ask questions. And then we signed, and we were not given any copy of the non-disclosure agreement. But I vividly remember, because that was the part that stood out for me, the 20 years in jail if you ever disclose you're working for Facebook. The job started, you could just hear screams because the production, we call it production hall. That's the name of how they frame it, production hall. So it's as big as this hall. So you'd be sitting, facing each other in your desks. And we would just hear scream on the end of the hall. You hear someone has run out. You're like, what is happening? You rush to go and see what is on their computer. What did they just see? Because I think they programmed it in a way that it was coming in now slowly. So the first months, they were nothing like graphic contents. It was just Facebook profile pictures. And then they would just, maybe release 10, 15 graphic contents. So you would just hear scream. You're like, what is happening? You rush there to go and see. What did they see? And that was the beginning of our predicament, I would say, because it now increased. People will faint in the production floor. People will run out crying. So there was just the hall, since we could see each other from across, it was just tensed. People started getting sick, especially now the ladies were the ones who would get sick, would collapse more. Because I think maybe men have a way of doing, I don't know, but the women will be rushed to the hospital. There's always an ambulance picking up someone. That was how bad it was. Talking about the content itself, from my own personal experience, I never knew I was going through a lot of mental health issues because of the job. Because I've relocated from Nigeria to Kenya, I was like, okay, maybe it's the weather, maybe, it's school, I'm stressed, managing the two and all that. But when I got to the hospital, the doctors kept asking, what do you do? And I couldn't answer that because they realized, because I've done up to CT scan, I've done several tests, they couldn't find out exactly what was wrong with me. I couldn't sleep. I would hear voices. Sometimes I would have to hit my head on the wall to feel, maybe I could feel pain, and I can't feel pain. And I knew something was definitely wrong with me, but I had my BSc in psychology, and I'm also doing my master's then in clinical psychology, but I couldn't relate that this is something, mentally are mentally having, distress regarding to, in relation to the job. And the doctors kept asking, what do you do? I keep lying, I'm a translator, I'm a call center agent, because of course, the fear of going to jail as a foreigner in Kenya. And even my parents, no one knew I was doing content moderation, because now the fear, so the only people we could talk about what we do was our colleagues. And we couldn't even help ourselves because we don't even know our rights as workers. And now you're in a foreign land, so you're just helpless. You wake up in the middle of the night, you reach out to the team leaders and say, hey, I can't sleep, I'm having nightmares. And they're like, oh, just speak to the counselor. And now the counselor themselves will not even understand what you're talking about, because it's a new form of work. It's not the normal, I am traumatized, I just walk to therapy, and then I'm working towards healing. It's something you deal with every day. Yeah, so even while we were working, we would call sometimes the counselors and be like, come and see what I just saw. And they would be crying, they would run out crying. Don't ever show me this, So we lost hope even with the counselors. And sometimes whatever you discuss with them, you will hear it from the manager's mouth, like exactly word to word what you said to them in confidence. You will hear it with the managers. So we couldn't even trust them to get the help we needed. And then when you go for your own personal, care in the hospital, you can't also disclose you're working for content moderation. So that was the dilemma we've been in for years, because sometimes, like she said, people will say, why are you there? Do you have a gun to your head? But I think as you work, you get also trauma bond to what you're doing. Even when you're on leave, you miss what you watch. That's how crazy it was. When you leave, you're like, when can I get back to work? Because what you're watching, you were so used to it, you call your colleagues, you watch. So it gives you that kind of feeling. It's just weird, actually, when you think about it, but that was how we felt. When you go for leave for 2 days, you feel something is missing, or 3 weeks, you feel something is missing. When you're back to work, you're like, oh yeah, that content, And that's how crazy it was for all the years that we've worked. And when we talk about even the working environment, the work environment itself, because we're all going through mental health issues at some point, so you could imagine how toxic it was. People were really, some people are just angry, some people are always crying, emotional. So the work environment itself will even make you depressed. When you walk in, you know that something is wrong. These people are just like zombies most of the time, because you've not slept at night, and then you have to come back to work and spend 9 hours watching the same thing. When you see a graphic content, so I will be giving examples, I'm so sorry, but I would really like you to understand what we have really seen while working. You can see beheading from an ISIS terrorist organization. Someone's head is on the slab, it's been caught. You can see women being stabbed severally in their stomach, their intestines are coming out. You can see someone fall from a 10th, 15th floor. He's still alive, but then there are pieces of his body parts on the floor. You could see the brain out. You could see a 2-month-old being raped, and then her whole intestines are out. So these are just few of the most gory things that we watch every day. And these are millions and billions of contents. So they're just back to back. So for example, I see one and I'm like, okay, now this is a lot. Let me go see a counselor and just take a 5-minute walk. Immediately I sit on my desk as I'm opening it. It might be worse than what I went to see a counselor for. So at some point, we just, help ourselves. If I can't see, I just stand up or I scream. Another colleague of mine will just step in, who is more resilient, or not resilient, but then let me just use the word resilient, to action that ticket for me. So you could do 1,000 of them in a day within your 9 hours shift. You can do 1,000 of such tickets. And you have no control over what you can see next, so you can't even prepare mentally and be like, okay, today it's going to be maybe a good day at work. The mental health provision that they claim they gave us, which we always complain about, is the counselors also themselves, like I've mentioned earlier, don't even know how this work, what this work entails. They are not even equipped themselves to know how to deal with this kind of job and this kind of work. And this is one thing we are also pushing as a union to see that researches are being done to see how can we treat or what are the best ways to go about such traumas. Because even after work, you keep reliving what you've seen while you were at work. You're closing your eyes maybe to take a nap and seeing whatever you've seen, and it keeps going on and on and on. The medical cover which the company gives doesn't even provide like a huge part of it to mental health care. So most times you have to ask them, okay, I want to see a psychiatrist, okay, we have to be the one now to look for them on your behalf. So you can't just walk into the hospital and say, use my card, I want to see a psychiatrist or I want to see a psychologist. So it wasn't useful as much because most of the trauma or the situation we've been through causes psychosomatic symptoms. Because for me, when I was going through a lot of medical challenges, which I thought was medical, was actually psychological. Because I couldn't sleep, I developed asthma, which mostly I would have panic attacks, but it was defined as asthma because I just can't breathe. I would just be gasping for air. I would just feel like I was going to die. I used the highest asthma inhalers, and it wasn't working on me. And even at some point, the doctor is like, right now, I don't know which route to take with you, but I'll prefer you go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist to check because I suspect it's a psychological thing. But I couldn't really even get the help with the psychologist because I didn't still disclose what I was doing. So it's difficult for them to even know what is the trigger, like what is the cause. Same with so many of our colleagues. Some have had miscarriages, abortions, because when you see a content of a pregnant woman being slashed open and a baby being pulled out, 2 days later, we're hearing someone has a miscarriage and all that. And for those who have kids as well, it was traumatic for them. Now, after watching such contents, you're leaving your kids to a nanny or a caregiver, to look after your kids, and then you've seen that things can go wrong. So even in the office, we don't go into the production hall with our phones. So you see people getting anxious, going to check on their phone. When they hear anything, they're rushing to go and check. So it was quite, like I said, the environment was always tensed because no one, like a whole lot of people getting paranoid over so many little things because you've seen it and you think it can happen to you. But as foreigners, I think ours was a bit more complicated because some of us worked for almost a year without work permits. Yet the company took our taxes, and we don't even have a work permit for them to get a tax remit number, KRA. So I worked for 1 year without a work permit, but yet my taxes were being removed every month. Even the payment, when we were doing the interview, they told us, okay, you'll be paid $600 in a month, but they converted it now to Kenyan shillings, just like you said, and they said, okay, the minimum wage in Kenya, we're paying you guys high above the minimum wage. You guys should just thank us, we're doing a lot for you guys. But when we compare the work we are doing, in fact, we do more of the work than even the people from the US and all that, because most of the suicide contents, especially during COVID, were pushed to us because the people from that other side were not given those contents. So it's us who is in Africa, in Kenya, we're the ones now doing the most toxic and graphic content because they claim that it's COVID, people are at home, they are vulnerable to committing suicide, so those contents are not given. But for us, we are made to do those contents while we're isolated in a hotel for almost 6 months without even the proper care that we needed. So you're alone in your room watching all these contents. That was how bad it was. And even when we were working in that hotel during COVID, we were forced to take leave days. So if, for example, I'm not feeling well, I can't do my job, you will be asked to take leave days. And it's COVID, so people were at home. We were like, it doesn't really make sense because we've even gone out of our way to work, to come to this hotel to work for you guys. And there was even a published article where Meta said they gave their workers, was it $1,000 something during the COVID period, and they say, no, it's not for you guys, it's for the guys working in the US and all that. So we never got even $1 from that. So it's quite a very, very long, I'm trying to touch on all the parts, but fast forward now to 2019, after we've worked for like almost 6 months, we decided to unionize because now we realize that there's a lot of deception in this whole thing. We never bargained to do content moderation. And when we started where we were supposed to ask those questions, you guys deceived us by giving us, the profile pictures. So now we're a bit relaxed. We didn't even ask the questions we're supposed to ask until now months when we realized that this is how bad this job is and what it can do to you. The payment, they converted now to Kenyan shillings. It was lower. We didn't have work permits. Guys were being arrested even right in front of the office. We're taken to prison. And then they go, I don't know what they do. You're out. The next time you're arrested again. And a whole lot. So we decided to unionize at that point. We agreed, which Daniel Mutang was the one who was chairing the whole organizing of that. We decided not to work. One of the days we said we were going to put our tools down, we're not working. We stood outside and a whole chaos was happening. Of course, it's a toxic environment, and talking about now the seniority or the career development, because there was none. I worked for 4 years, but someone who was employed on my 4th year earns the same amount with me. That was how it was. So the issue of, okay, you want to be a team leader, now you have to, be the manager's puppet, snitching on your colleagues to get the position. That was what exactly was happening. And then even the sexual exploitation, you have to date me to get the position as women. That was exactly what was happening. So they used some of our colleagues now to get information that we are actually unionizing, and then it got busted. They came with armed men to the office. They're like, it's either you go in and work or you walk out completely from the gate and you just know you'll be sent back to your country. Because we have people from different countries, from Nigeria, South Africa, Uganda, Somali, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi. We have so many countries there. So the threat of you, once you walk out, your flight ticket will just be sent and you will be sent back home. So it was a difficult situation because we didn't plan for that. Remember, we have an NDA, so we're not discussing with people outside. We're just doing it ourselves, so we didn't have the legal backing to know how to contain the situation. So when they told us it's either in or out, people started going back. So now you see the break came in. They started, we demanded, let's have a meeting with the guys from San Francisco. Let's bargain, like we had a memorandum of what we wanted. Okay, let's discuss this. They're like, no, we can't discuss with you as a group. You have to come in individually. Remember, they're a team of managers of around 5 or so. So immediately you walk in, the question is, are you for us or are you for them? So that was how it went, and the whole thing went off, and Daniel was sacked, or he was fired, and a few other people were fired. And then we went back to slavery, I would say, because at this point now, no one could move again. So everyone was like, okay, let's try and get a job, then we live here. The job, how it is, of course. You couldn't even get a job. And even when you speak to your parents back home or your family members, I'm going to leave this job and come back home, they're like, you took a plane, just like she said. You took a plane to Kenya, you're a foreigner, you're getting good good amount of money. Why do you want to come back? You can't explain why. So they're like, oh, just hang in there when you get another job, but this is the best job you can get, at least you took a plane out. So that kept going for 4 years until 2022, where Daniel now filed the case, and it was now published also on Times, and it went viral what was happening. We've been pushing for better salaries. They refuse. They're like, oh no, this is the minimum wage. After Daniel's whole issue came out, we were just called and said, okay, your salary will be increased by 20,000 shillings. So I don't know the calculation, but now you'll be getting 20 more extra money. The salary have been increased. That's 2022, February. Yeah, they started, people started reaching out to us on LinkedIn. They said, no, guys, you have to go and change your LinkedIn page. Don't put a content moderator, put you an agent or an associate. So they were monitoring our social media handles that you have to go and change it, because people now were reaching out to us. You guys need to speak up. You're going through a lot, Now they realize things are going to go out of hand. They provided email addresses where we would share. Whoever reached out to us, we should share those information to them via that email. And things, we started getting aware of our situation now, and we started asking questions, and they're like, okay, now it's time for these guys to go. And in January 2023, all of us, over 200 of us, were sacked, were fired. They called it redundancy. So they called us on the 5th of January, and they're like, oh guys, Facebook don't have jobs for us now, so you guys all have to go. So because of the Nigerian election that was supposed to happen, I think in February as well, they had to extend, because they realized if they were to bring new moderators, they wouldn't know how to do the job. So they extended now our termination to March 31st, so that we, the Nigerian content moderators, will be able, because we are knowledgeable in the market or wherever, we should finish with the contents of the Nigerian election, and then we would go. During this process, they were also hiring completely new set of people from different parts of Africa again, to a company called Majorel, which is now Teleperformance in Kenya. For the same job, they claim it's not available. So it's like you move it from A now are getting aware, so let's move it now to a totally new people, because we applied for the job again in the other company. All of us were blacklisted, so they didn't employ any one of us in the other project. So at that point, now we met our lawyer, which is also in the room. She's right there, Mercy Mutaimi, which did a very amazing work to really mobilize us at that point, because people were also scared of joining the petition itself. They're like, no, I've signed a non-disclosure, I don't want to go to jail. And she's like, no, it's your right. Even I myself, I spoke to her twice. I will change my mind. I'll tell her I'll join the case. I'll call in the morning. I'll call her and say, no, I don't want to join. The next day I'll call her. I'll be like, okay, now I want to join. So that was happening. But with time, we had 186 of us who joined the petition finally. And the journey has been moving. It's been 1 year, almost 1 year, 6 months. And we got a big win on the 20th of September, because, Facebook kept, appealing. They don't know us. Like, they have no business with us. It's Sama, which is the outsourcing company, who is our employer. But mind you, when we go to work every day, we log into the Facebook application. Their website, their site work. We have our Facebook password and our emails where we log into the Facebook platform. If, for example, there's a downtime on the Facebook platform, we'll just hang around because there's no work for us to do. But they kept, denying us in court, saying they don't know us, and also the issue of jurisdiction, because they claim we're not working in a fiscal office for them, and they don't also have a fiscal office in Kenya, and a whole lot of drama. But we're happy on the 20th of September, the Kenyan court ruled that Meta for the first time in Africa can be trialed in Kenya. So that's a big win for us. That's a big win for us. And yeah, as we listen to whole of this story, I think the key point for us also is to even, the platform that Joey and a whole lot of donors here and supporters that have given us to really share our story, because for the 4 years, for me, I felt like I was in a cage, because I really couldn't speak about what I was going through. And then you have a lot of medical issues, and then you can't even tell your doctor what you're going through. At some point you feel you're going to die, a whole lot. But yeah, these have given us a voice to speak and also to share our story and what we've been through. And we hope that we'll win at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of it heavy. I'll just open it up to the floor for 5 minutes, and then we wrap up. I know that we don't have the 5 minutes, but I'm going to steal them. So if anyone has any intervention, please keep it short and we can close.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
My name is Masi Mutemi, and I represent Kauna and the other content moderators in Kenya. Just a word of praise, I guess, for the moderators for how brave they've been in fighting this battle, and also a call for help. The moderators are now preparing their final evidence to present before the court, because we just received the go-ahead from the Court of Appeal. And well, because of the redundancy, a lot of them had to go to their individual countries. So you can imagine coordinating 100+ people to present their evidence in Nairobi has become quite a nightmare. I can see there are many lawyers in the room, all legal organizations. So just in case there's someone in the room based in South Africa, Nigeria, Uganda, Ethiopia, or Ghana, please just, I'd like to have a word after the call, because we do need lawyers to help just with signing of documents. That's the support we need at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. There's one behind you, Omola. Behind you.
Hello, my name is Mina Bilkis from Sierra Leone. I don't have a question, just a comment. I'm a feminist storyteller and a content creator, so this session is very pertinent to me. I just want to give you all your flowers. It's not easy. I work in digital rights research and online gender-based violence, so I understand and sympathize, and I just want to say kudos.
Thank you, Mina. And I'm glad you made it here. Any other intervention? I don't know if there's anything you'd like to share as we close. Anyone? Yeah, you can. I think it's on.
Okay. Thank you, Kauna, for sharing, and thank you for the lawyer. I'm just going to say that to encourage all of us, so that what Kauna has shared with us will not just be performative, is the fact that go online. I know that we've talked about solidarity amongst platform workers, but there's also solidarity that is community-based. Go online, guys. Let's put pressure on a lot of these tech companies. If possible, boycott whatever it is they are offering, because that's also one of the ways that we can support platform workers and kind of cripple them, hold our governments accountable, That's one of the ways. Support them when they are going to court, particularly those in Kenya. Show up, tweet it, just as a way to just put pressure on everyone. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so thank you so much for coming to this session. I hope that you picked out a few things, and I hope that as we continue with FIFA, we ask the relevant questions. I know that there are a lot of tech bros in the space, and so asking the critical questions and having the uncomfortable conversations is always critical. and enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye. Thank you so much to the panelists.